This story begins in the year 2017, where we meet Hanagaki Takamichi, a 26-year-old man living a loser's life. His neighbor won't stop bothering him, his boss treats him poorly, and even kids make fun of him. The only girlfriend he ever had was back in middle school when he was involved in a street gang and had dyed his hair blonde. However, after he moved away from the city to escape all of that, he never saw her again. One day, while watching TV, he saw a news report about an accident involving the gang he used to be a part of, where 6 innocent people died, including his ex-girlfriend and her younger brother. On that same day, while waiting for the train, he is pushed by an unknown person, and just when it seems he's going to die, he travels back in time 12 years to when he was in middle school and his ex-girlfriend was still his girlfriend. He decides then to save her, and so begins this 10-minute summary. As I mentioned, Takamichi went back 12 years to the past when he was in his second year of middle school. He was in a small gang with his friends, which was led by his best friend, Akun. One day, they got into a fight with second-year students from another school, but instead, the third-year students showed up and beat them up. They also forced them to join their group and treated them like slaves. The gang leader organized underground fights with other gangs and made his people fight so he could bet on them. He forced Takamichi to fight, and he was knocked out with a single punch. But not everything is so bad for the protagonist, as his ex-girlfriend, who is not yet his ex, is still alive. Hinata Tachibana. Every time Takamichi sees her, it gives him the strength to keep going. One day, he saved a boy from some bullies, who turned out to be Hinata's younger brother, Naoto, who was also going to die 12 years in the future. Takamichi tells him everything that will happen, intending to vent, and so that Naoto would remember the date of his death to prevent it and save his sister. But when they shake hands, Takamichi returns to the present and wakes up in the hospital, where Naoto, who is no longer dead, visits him. Thanks to the warning Takamichi gave him 12 years in the past, he was able to save himself, but not his sister. Naoto became a detective to investigate his sister's death, which was caused by Manjiro Sano and Teta Kisaki, as they are the leaders of the gang, which is called Tokyo Manji Gang, Toman. He asks Takamichi to travel back to the past to prevent Hinata's death. Takamichi returned to the present after the handshake, and they realized that this was the trigger for time travel, so they shook hands again, and the protagonist traveled back to the past. Back in that time, Takamichi finds himself in one of the underground fights. He approaches who he believes to be the boss and challenges him to a bare-knuckle fight where he obviously loses. But after the protagonist shouts that he won't give up because he has a purpose, 2 important figures appear: Toman's vice captain, Draken, and the gang's captain, Manjiro Sano, better known as Mikey. Mikey takes an interest in Takamichi because of his determination, tells him that they're friends from now on, and beats up the big guy who thought he was the boss for tarnishing the gang's name. The next day, when Takamichi is in class, it's Mikey who comes looking for him, but his ex-girlfriend, who is still his girlfriend, tries to stop him, thinking he's the one who's always hurting Takamichi. After they clear things up, they act as if nothing happened. Mikey tells him that he became interested in him because he reminds him of his late older brother and says he wants him to accompany him in fulfilling his goal, which is to create a new era for gangsters. Later, Takamichi accompanies Hinata to a festival, and when he tries to hold her hand, he accidentally grabs Naoto's hand, which unintentionally sends him back to the future. He explains everything that happened to adult Naoto, who tells him about Toman and that his childhood best friend Akun is now part of Toman's upper ranks. They decide to visit him to ask about Mikey and why the gang changed so much. Akun tells him that he hasn't seen Mikey in years, and that everything went downhill after Draken's death on August 3rd, and that it's all Kisaki's fault, whom he now works for. After confessing all of this and expressing his fear of Kisaki, Akun asks Takamichi to save everyone by preventing Toman from getting any worse, and then he commits suicide in front of him. Takamichi is devastated by this, but becomes even more determined to save everyone, not just his ex-girlfriend, but everyone affected by Kisaki. So he travels back in time and wakes up with a half-naked girl on top of him. It turns out that the girl is Draken's girlfriend and also Mikey's sister, but nothing really happened between them. Later, Draken calls him to meet at a shrine, where Takamichi learns about the possible reason for Draken's death: a fight against another group of gangsters, Mobius, the largest gang, who had beaten up Pa's friend, one of Toman's captains. They had raped his friend's girlfriend in front of him and hanged his family. Now, they planned to take revenge on August 3rd, and Takemichi would try to prevent it at all costs by talking to Mikey about why this fight isn't a good idea. But just then, Moebius shows up looking for a fight in large numbers, and Mikey knocks out Moebius's leader, Osanai, with a single kick. When everyone had to flee because the police were coming, Pa stabs Osanai to get revenge for what he did to his friend, and decides to turn himself into the police while the others escape. The protagonist ends up feigning for a while, so he doesn't know what happened afterward. However, Pa's surrender created differences of opinion in Toman for leaving one of their own behind. It even caused a conflict between the gang's leaders, Mikey and Draken, who were at odds. But thanks to the protagonist, they reconcile. On the other hand, Pa's best friend, who was still unhappy, held a grudge against Mikey and Draken. Not only him, but also the guy who thought he was the boss and organized underground fights, were conspiring with Moebius to kill Draken. And guess when? Indeed, on August 3rd, when Takemichi and Hinata were on a double date with Draken and his girlfriend at a festival. They get separated, and Pei, along with members of Moebius, were waiting to ambush him. The protagonist tried to stop it when he realized what was happening, but he got beaten up and left on the ground. He felt useless, but then he gathered the courage to keep trying to save Draken, and little by little, all the Toman members showed up to help, including Mikey. This started a gang war. During all this, we meet a rather important character in the plot, Hanma, who would be the first person Mikey couldn't knock out with a single punch, and who tells Mikey that from now on, Moebius would evolve and eventually become Valhalla. On the other hand, the protagonist was trying to find Draken amidst everything, but when he finds him, it's already too late. The guy who thought he was the boss and organized underground fights had already stabbed him. Mikey asks Takemichi to carry him and take care of him, and he does, but on the way, he runs into the group that stabbed Draken. Takemichi was very scared, but he still faced them, even though one of them stabbed his hand with a knife. Still, the protagonist didn't give up and managed to defeat them. Later, the protagonist's friends arrive to save him. They take Draken to the hospital where he undergoes surgery so he won't die. In the end, Takemichi managed to save Draken and change the future. The fight between Moebius and Toman ended when the police arrived, and everything would have ended well. The only thing is that Mikey started to suspect the protagonist for knowing so much about what was going to happen. But even so, he still sees him as part of Toman, and that's why he gave him the uniform. Although the protagonist, thinking he doesn't deserve the uniform, doesn't wear it. With everything resolved, the protagonist returns to the future. Everything was supposed to be fine. His life was still boring, but his red-haired best friend is still alive and is now a stylist. Hina is alive, and they spent some time alone talking. But the protagonist went to the bathroom while she waited for him in the car, and when he came out, Takemichi ran into Hanma, but he didn't recognize him. As he was approaching the car, he saw it being crushed against a wall by a truck driven by his red-haired best friend. His friend told him that he now worked for Kisaki, whom he was terrified of, which is why he did what he did, using the exact same words as when he committed suicide in the other timeline. Now, not only did Takemichi have to watch his best friend die again, but he also witnessed Hina die in front of him due to the car explosion, but this only motivated the protagonist to do one thing. He would go back to the past to try to save them again by becoming one of Toman's leaders. That's crazy, Naoto told him, but before traveling back in time, they investigated what caused everything to turn out this way. Since Draken didn't die, but the outcome was still the same, they went to see him in prison. Draken was serving a life sentence for killing people, and he said the same thing as his red-haired best friend. It was all Kisaki's fault. So now the protagonist is going back to the past to find Kisaki, whom he hasn't even met yet. And when he travels back in time, Mikey announces that the new captain of Toman's 3rd Division, replacing Pa, will be Kisaki. The protagonist punches him right in the face. Then the 1st Division captain, Baji, arrives, and after giving the protagonist a beating for no reason, leaves Toman, saying he is going to join Valhalla. Valhalla is already growing, and many are joining the gang, until Takemichi finds a charm with a photo of Toman's founders. Mikey tells the protagonist that from now on, he is an official member of Toman, and if he doesn't like Kisaki, he can kick him out, but in return, he must go find Baji from Valhalla and bring him back to Toman. The next day, Kazutora comes to his class to pick him up and takes him to Valhalla's hideout, where he learns several things. No one knows the boss, they only know the one below the boss, which is Hanma, and that not only he, but also Kazutora were founders of Toman along with Mikey and Draken. But Kazutora was expelled because he was the one who killed Mikey's older brother. However, it was an accident since they actually wanted to steal a motorcycle to give to Mikey for his birthday, but they didn't know the shop owner was his older brother, and they ended up killing him. They told the protagonist all of this to prove that Baji was always against Mikey, and they gave him a message. On October 31st, there would be a war between Toman and Valhalla. The protagonist tells this to Matsuno, Baji's vice captain. Matsuno says he doesn't like Kisaki either, so he's investigating him. They went to talk to Osanai, the former leader of Mobius, and Osanai tells them that all the conflicts that have occurred so far were the result of Kisaki's plans, who had been the head of Mobius for his own gain, and now plans to use both Toman and Valhalla. Also, Kisaki planned this upcoming war, a war where everyone fought. But the important thing was to prevent what the protagonist found out when he returned to the future. What the protagonist discovered and now has to prevent is Beiji's death at Kazutora's hands so that Mikey doesn't lose control and kill Kazutora. The protagonist thought he could prevent it because Baji was stabbed by Kazutora but didn't die. However, in the end, Baji falls unconscious, and when it seemed like things were going the same way, Mikey reacts and tries to kill Kazutora by beating him, but Baji recovers, approaches them, and in front of everyone stabs himself to death to prevent Kazutora from feeling guilty in the future and to keep Mikey from thinking Kazutora killed him. Baji does this because he loves them both, as they are Toman's founders and his best friends. In fact, thanks to the charm that the protagonist found, he managed to stop them and make them see reason, as this charm was very important to the founders because they bought it the same day they all created Toman together. When Mikey sees it, he comes to his senses. Later, the police arrive. Kazutora stays with Baji's body and is arrested. Days later, Toman has their last meeting of the season, where they announce two things: the union of Valhalla with Toman, and due to Baji's death, they name Takamichi as the captain of the first division. But when he returned to the future to talk to adult Naoto, he couldn't contact him. In this future, Takamichi is now a high-ranking member of the Mafia, followed by the vice captain, and had a conversation with Kisaki, who deceived them by saying he regretted everything he did 12 years ago, but it was all a lie, as he did it to make them lower their guard, drug them, and once they woke up, he shot both the vice captain and Takamichi, and that's where the first season ends. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the summary of the second season.